University of Michigan professor of economics and public policy Justin Wolfers joins us. Cook Political Report senior editor and elections analyst Dave Wasserman, and national affairs correspondent at The Nation, John Nichols. John, I want to bring you in. Who do you believe she was speaking to today? Does it go beyond Raleigh, North Carolina?
Oh, she's speaking to people all across the country. And I was very interested in the conversation you just had with some other very wise folks, where they were talking about.
I know you're not talking about Ron Insana and Doug Heye.
I totally am. But what I'm saying is they were talking about comparing Harris to Biden, right? Looking for those small areas of difference, or maybe even some bigger areas of difference. I would tell you right now, as I travel around the country, and I just did a 5-state drive through the upper Midwest, people aren't talking that way. They're talking about Harris versus Trump. And what they're hearing from Trump is a very confused, very, kind of throw something at the wall today, so throw something else tomorrow. A lot of talk about immigration, a lot of talk about all sorts of other stuff. Harris was laser focused on economics. Obviously, this was her economic speech. But if she keeps on this is something that an awfully lot of Americans connect to. And I'll focus in on just one quick element of it. That notion of having a job that pays a living wage, right? That you can actually, get by on. I noticed today, just this afternoon, as the speech was on, the United Auto Workers Union and other unions were live tweeting the vice president's speech. So they were amplifying it out to their members. That hasn't happened much in recent years. It's a very, very good sign that Harris is making connection with the people that she needs to be connected with. And the last thing I'll say is this, that reference to housing is a huge deal, not merely for people who are looking for a house. It is a huge deal for parents and for grandparents who are, looking at whether their family can stay in the same place, whether their kids can buy a house in the same town where they live. And so the more she burrows into some of these issues, these specifics, I think the more she connects with people at a very real level.
There's a lot of overlap, too. So if you can buy a house in the same town as your parents, your grandparents, you have help with childcare. You can have kids more easily. It eases the pain that you feel financially by having children. I mean, the single biggest cost in having a kid, beyond them eating blueberries, which I complain about a lot, obviously, is childcare. How much it costs to send them to daycare when they're little, how much it costs to have potentially help at home, how much it costs to feed them at school. It's expensive to get childcare in this country. Can I ask you quickly, John, about the Teamsters? I know there's a lot of Teamsters leaders who are begging the union head to make an endorsement. What's going on with them?
There's a lot going on. Look, the head of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, just the other day had a really stark critique of Donald Trump's appearance with Elon Musk, right? And where they were sort of joking about firing workers. And so the union actually had some very, very critical statements on social media about Trump. That's a big deal because I think they are starting to delineate there. The other thing is the Black Caucus of the Teamsters, a very substantial portion of membership, just stepped out and endorsed Kamala Harris. Obviously, that doesn't speak for the whole union, but that speaks for a portion there. So I think there's a lot of movement here. The question, of course, is, when do you get Kamala Harris talking to the Teamsters leadership directly? When does she go to talk to them? When perhaps does the Teamsters leader come to this convention in Chicago and speak? We don't know where that stands yet, but I think that's the point where the things could come together. And if I had to bet, what I would tell you this, I doubt very much the Teamsters will endorse Donald Trump. I think there is at least some evidence that they could endorse the Democrats. And so that's kind of where things stand now, whether there's an endorsement of the Democrats or whether the union decides to stand down. If they do endorse the Democratic ticket, well, that really kind of closes the circle on major labor unions. And would be a huge deal for Harris and Biden, or Harris and Walz.
Justin, in looking at what she's proposing, obviously this is her wish list. It's what she wants to do. There are a lot of constraints that will be surrounding her if she is president that include, the heavy lift of getting something through Congress, especially if Congress is not all within Democratic control. What do you see for what she just proposed as the most doable?
I think there's probably a lot of energy around trying to do something around housing. Her her policy position there, we economists have warned for a long time, if house prices are too high, it's because there's too many buyers chasing too few houses. So giving more buyers more money doesn't help, but finding ways of creating more houses does. That's actually remarkably close to a bipartisan position, maybe not bipartisan with Trump world, but certainly with conservative Republicans. And so that's something I think she can really pretty easily get done.
Are you Australian, Justin?
I am, mate. Happy
I just want to make sure you're not from New Zealand. I don't want to mix up a Kiwi with an Aussie.
You also wouldn't want to invite me back if that were the case.
The question I have for you is, this is something that I only learned about when I was thinking about buying a house myself. And part of the reason why housing is so expensive in New York City is that there's retirement funds. The Australian Retirement Fund buys up properties here in New York City, buys up single-family homes. And I find that so interesting and so hard to wrap my mind around, that the priority is not for people living here, but rather we're not just fighting with each other for housing, we're fighting with a country that's buying up our properties for their retirement fund.
I'm not going to cop a whole lot of grief here around that, mate. Look, investors everywhere are interested in housing. Housing's a very important asset. And I'm actually going to defend it somewhat, which is it can be hard for a working class family to be able to get the down payment and get a new house built. If investors are going to be the ones who do it, then renting is an on-ramp into housing. Kamala Harris described in that speech how her own family had used rentals that way. You know, when these big investment funds are buying up housing, they're not leaving it empty. They're renting it out, and they're renting it out to New Yorkers, and the number of places in New York doesn't change. In fact, investors can be a big part of the solution here, which is we need more houses. And if they were willing to build them, that's going to ease a lot of the constraints we currently face.
I'm sorry to target you with that just because of your accent, but I appreciate the answer. All right, so Dave, when we're looking at who she's speaking to, we've talked a lot about the general message. The polling is suggesting right now that there's a big divide between women and men, that Donald Trump is making real inroads with men that maybe used to be a fan of the Democratic Party, and that Kamala Harris is just running up the numbers when it comes to women. Does a speech like this cut through the gender divide?
Time will tell, but what we know is the reason why Donald Trump's been winning higher shares of Hispanic voters, Black voters, and young voters than 4 years ago, at least in polling so far, has been a larger gender divide, where he's winning larger shares of men basically around the side-by-side comparison of the economy. And when you look at the economic data, there's a lot positive for the administration to point to, but what's really gotten in the way of more favorable views towards the economy is interest rates. And that's why I think, in addition to what Kamala Harris is saying, what the Fed does this fall is going to be pretty significant for how she's able to convince voters to stay the course and adopt her plan. It's similar populism to what we saw from Biden, but it's amazing what a difference a new messenger makes, because in our survey of battleground states, Trump only had a 6-point lead on cost of living and getting inflation under control. Joe Biden had a 20-point deficit on that question in May.
That's huge. So part of what the argument you're making there, it seems to me, Dave, it's not so much about policy. It's more about personality. It's more about the packaging than it is about the actual policy.
Well, and also voters are suddenly curious about what Democrats have to offer because they have a new candidate. Voters were tuning Biden and his ads out. And her message in her ad of only working one job to get ahead, you know, that resonates. But the other factor here, we've talked about housing costs, but healthcare costs as well. And Kamala Harris had a 13-point advantage on dealing with healthcare on this question. Obviously, Democrats are going to be pointing towards to Trump's plan to let Obamacare subsidies expire at the end of 2025. I'll be curious whether the Medicare rate or Medicaid Advantage rate cut that's supposed to go into effect in October has an effect on seniors' views towards the cost of health care.